Let's learn some Torah, and as we learn some Torah, we can.
Yes.
Please God, all be good. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone that we know that we need to learn the Torah in their merit, who may not be well. No, Len Zlotnik's not well. A couple of other people. So for all those who aren't, we'll learn in schus of all those who are not well from corona and anything else.
Yeah.
And please God, people
But
should
to say that again, who did you say? Lenny Zlotnik.
Lenny Zlotnik, yeah. But so please God, he should be well.
Oh man.
Him and everybody else. And it's a time for big bracha, you know. As Av moves, so we're moving towards a much lighter space. Because it's a lighter space, please God should just bring lots of bracha, and we'll speak a little bit about that in this year. So what I want to look at is really just the thing that everybody knows it, but I want to try and let's understand a little and unpack it a little bit more. And what is that? That is the benching. The pasuk says, Hashem says, this is the deal. You eat, you get full, you make a bracha, and the way we translate the word uveirachta is that you'll bless Hashem on the land and the good land that He gave you. So there are a number of discussions in that, and there are a number of different mafarshim that discuss it. I just wanted to look at a few of them, and then hopefully put in some new ideas that we may not have heard before. Okay, so firstly, the Chizkuni. The Chizkuni says, it says, "Ve'achalta v'savata uveirachta." Ve'achalta v'savata. He says, "Mikan anu omrim shlosh brachot b'birkat hamazon." From here we say 3 brachas in birkat hamazon. 3 brachas in birkat hamazon. So if you look in your benching, in your Sidurim, which I'll bring onto the screen just so that we can see it. Give me a second. Okay, well, you know the benching. There are 3 brachas. I'm just trying to find it. Sorry. They are the brachas that start. So it starts off the benching is very simple. We start off benching, and we say ala aretz ve'ala mazon. That's the first bracha that we make. I'm just going to get it up. Okay, ala aretz ve'ala mazon. Then we the next bracha that we do is we say nodeh lecha, and after nodeh lecha, then we say hazanet hakol. Sorry, hazanet hakol comes first, and then it comes ala aretz ve'ala mazon. Let me just get it up so I don't get confused. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you so you'll be able to see it. There we go. Okay. So the first bracha is as we said. There we go. Okay. Hazanet hakol. The second bracha is nodeh lecha, and that finishes ala aretz ve'al hamazon. And that's all about gratitude. It's like an amazing bracha. I mean, you haven't got time to go through it now. But so that's ala aretz ve'al hamazon. Then there's a third bracha. What's the third bracha? The third bracha is Uvenei Yerushalayim Yirakodesh B'Imher V'Ameinu Brachat Hashem B'nei Barachama V'Yerushalayim Amen. And that is this one here. There we go. Uvenei Yerushalayim. So according to the Chizkuni, from the pasuk Ve'achalta V'Savata V'Rachta, we learn that we take 3 brachas. Except we've got a problem. What's our problem? Our problem is there. It even says there 4th bracha. Can you see that? 4th bracha. So the Chizkuni says that the Torah tells us about 3 brachas. Our benching is 4 brachas. So where's the 4th bracha come from? So the 4th bracha comes in was established in Yavne. Yavne was the place where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, just before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash by the Romans, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai came out and he said to Vespasian, Tain li Yavne v'chachameh. Give me Yavne and all the chachamim, all the great sages of Yavne, that at least I can re-establish Torah in that place. I understand the Beit HaMikdash is going to be a place which is going to be destroyed, but at least I need to have a place where we can continue our Torah learning. And for whatever reason, Vespasian gave it to him. He gives him Yavne, and in Yavne they kind of repower Torah in the Jewish world at that time. Around the same time, there's a terrible tragedy that happens. we know that one of the reasons that we mourn on Tisha B'Av is because of the destruction of the city of Beitar. Now, Beitar today is like this thriving city towards the south of Yerushalayim. There's Beitar Ilit, there's Beitar Aleph. It's a powerful place. There's lots of Jews living there, and they were during the time of the Beis Hamikdash as well, the time of the Romans. It was an enormous city, but on Tisha B'Av it was destroyed, and it was destroyed. The way the Gemara describes it is a very difficult description. Like the Gemara describes how the blood flowed from Beitar into the sea. There was so much killing and so much bloodshed that it was terrible, and so that's one of the reasons that we fast. However, the problem is that they wouldn't allow the Jews to bury the bodies of the people that were killed there, and eventually they did allow them to. And when did they allow them to? They allowed them to do it on Tu B'Av, which is days later. It's actually years later that they did it, but they allowed them to do it eventually on Tu B'Av. And because they allowed them to do that, so therefore Chazal in Yavne established that they would make, there'd be another bracha, a bracha that we would say every day when we bench, and that's the bracha of Hatov HaMeitim. Hatov, the Tov is what is good that Hashem did. What happens is their bodies never decomposed, even though they were left out for a number of years. Then their bodies never decomposed, and the fact that therefore we recognize the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that, and the fact that Hashem also does good, and that He allowed us to bury the bodies, and that's that fourth bracha. So when the Chizkuni tells us that that there are three brachas, so those three brachas are three brachas d'oraisa. Those are the three brachas from the Torah, and then there's an additional bracha that comes midrabanan from a rabbinic point of view. Okay, so then he says, so how does this work? And it's so interesting because it's difficult to understand what he's saying. He says, "Ve'achalta v'savatu beirachta shemavarchin al ha'achila." We make a bracha on eating, zohu birkat hazan, and that's the bracha of hazan. So ve'achalta v'savatu beirachta et Hashem Elokecha. Come along, Chizkuni, and he says something very strange. L'rabot ba'al habayit uveirachtet Hashem Elokecha. You come to bless Hashem, and this comes to include the Baal Habayit. So it does. It's difficult to understand what he means, but it seems to be that it could be saying that what the Chizkuni is saying is it's coming to include that when you make the brocha, it's not sufficient to simply acknowledge the Ribono Shel Olam, but one also has to acknowledge the Baal Habayit of the place where you got the food. And that might be where we get the source of that harachaman, where we bless the Baal Habayit, etc. And the Gemara itself has a specific bracha, which we don't always say. And it's quite interesting that we don't say it, but there is this specific bracha that we give. It's called the Yehi Ratzon, where we go through, where we bless the Baal Habayit. And the nusach of that bracha is such a beautiful nusach, because really what it does is it focuses our acknowledgement on what every Baal Habayit means, what every person needs, and we're going to go into that right now as well. So the bracha is that we say is Yehi Ratzon, may it be Hashem your will, that the person should not lo yevosh, should not be ashamed, lo yikalem, in any way humiliated in this world or in another world. V'yatzliach, he should be successful b'chol nechasav, in all these endeavors. Now, this is a very male-focused one. I mean, now in the more modern Sidurim, they focus it both on the Baal Habayit and on the Baalat Habayit, and etc. But B'yuna Chasav Mutzlachim, that his business should be successful. Ukrovim la'ir, an amazing thing, and close to the city. In other words, the person should be able to succeed without having to travel all over the world. And don't let no Satan, let the Yetzer Hara sit in the work of his hands. In other words, he should not find challenges that are difficult to go through. And there should no opportunity present itself that the person doesn't have in their business, anything they do. And what a beautiful bracha that is. to give to another person, to say, I want them to be successful. I want them to constantly grow in their spiritual growth, in their physical growth, and I don't want them to fall into anything. Why? Because I have such deep appreciation for the fact that they've invited me around their table, that I'm giving them a bracha. And when I started thinking what I was going to say today, I thought, it's an amazing thing that this theme of bracha starts right at the beginning of the parasha as well. And it starts because it says Eikev tishma'un, that if we listen to what Hashem will say, then He'll give us all bracha. And one of the things one of the verses says Baruch tiyeh mikol amim, that we should be Baruch tiyeh, we should be blessed mikol amim, from all the other nations. And it's a fascinating thing, because when a person says Yasher koach to another, like you say shkoyach. If somebody does something, you get an aliyah, you do something, you say shkoyach. We all say shkoyach, right? So what is shkoyach actually? Shkoyach, the real word of shkoyach is yashar kochacha, which means may your strength be straight. So that's the real version. Where do we find that? We find it in the Midrash. When Moshe Rabbeinu breaks the luchot, Hashem says to him, yashar kochacha sheshibarta. Right? Your strength should be straight by the fact that you broke these things, which is difficult to understand. But the idea being that when you say Yashar kocha, you're saying to a person, I'm giving you a bracha, that you should be able to continue on this path, that you're trying to achieve something more, something greater, something bigger. And the response, our traditional response, some people say to the person, shkoyach, so then a modern parlance is a person responds shkoyach. So like, shkoyach, okay, weiter, move on. But that's not correct at all, actually, because the appropriate response whenever a person gives a bracha is to give them a bracha back, and ideally to add onto that bracha. So, for example, when we were in Eretz Yisrael, we went on a tour with Benji Levine. I don't know if you know Benji Levine, if you heard of Benji Levine. Wonderful. So Benji Levine is the grandson of Rav Aryeh Levine, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim, right? So Rav Aryeh Levine, and they lived in where is it? Nachlaot. And if you go into that area, Nachlaot, just by the Shuk in Yerushalayim, and all the Gedolei Yisrael used to live there, and people that didn't even know they were the Gedolei Yisrael, they lived there. And he told us fascinating stories and how these people did things and engaged. I mean, they told this amazing story about this one guy. I can't remember what his name was, but he was the milkman. And he was like the Gedolim used to go to him. It's amazing. Like all these things that we don't know about. We would go to the Gedolim and they would go to him to ask the questions. He was the milkman. He used to deliver milk every morning. And one of the things that the people saw that he had this old shmatadika hat, so they bought him a new hat, brand new hat. So he took his hat. Benji Levine tells us he takes his hat and he puts it into into the herring juice, like the brine from the herring. So can you imagine the schmeck of that hat, right? He puts it into the brine of the herring, his brand new hat, and he walks around selling milk. So like all the people couldn't believe, but you can't engage, you don't want to engage. So they got one of his children to go and ask him, why is it that he put the hat into the brine? So he said, because he goes to deliver milk. So, who comes to fetch the milk in the morning will be the women of the house. So if that's the case, he doesn't want to see them, doesn't want to in any way. He's such a holy man. So therefore he puts his hat on, which smells terrible, that they don't want to come out until he's gone. So he puts down the milk and then he comes out and he's gone. Okay, so that's the kind of people. They're crazy, like it's a whole different world that I think is difficult to understand. And he wouldn't be the guy giving you guys a shit. Let's put it that way at the moment. Okay, so anyway, so he told us that in those days, what they used to do, so when a person would say a good voch, so a person would wish, and it's funny, like I never understood. My dad always used to do this to me, but I never got it until I saw this. Like, so you say good voch, so the response to good voch is good voch, right? Says no. in the altars, they used to do, if the guy would say good vach, so our guy would say good chodesh. So it's a good week, so now you got to push it out, make a good chodesh. And if we say a good chodesh, you have a good shana, right? You have a good year. Says, but what happens if the person says to you, have a good shana? What do you do now? Like you can't say shnatayim, right? Says you have a good tamid. Tamid means always. Should just always be good, right? And that's what you do. We try. The idea is that we try to give bracha over and more and more and more and more. So therefore, when a person says Yashakoach, the response should be Baruch Tiyeh. Baruch Tiyeh means you should be blessed. But it's clear from the psukim in the parsha, when it says Baruch Tiyeh Mikol Amim, the pasuk says Baruch Tiyeh Mikol Lo Yeh Akar va'akara v'vemtecha, that you will not have an akar. Akar means a barren person, a barren man, a barren woman, neither you, the men or the women, nor in the animals. And the Chizkuni there, the same Chizkuni that we're just learning now, the Chizkuni says there, what does it mean? It means, doesn't mean only that you'll have children, but it means in the things that we do, in the things that we're trying to create, in the things that we're trying to make produce out of the activities that we're involved in our businesses, in our lives, in our personal growth, in our spiritual growth, none of that should be barren. So when you give a person says, you say shkoyach to a person, they should say Baruch Tiyeh, they add to that bracha. I'm giving you a bracha that what you've just been involved in should continue straightly. But they add and they say, and you, everything you should be even have a more bracha on it on top of that. And that's how it seemed to be that we should continue the way that we give brachas to people. So that's just as an aside from the Chizkuni. So now let's continue with the benching. So we've got Avchalta v'savata v'rachta es Hashem Elokecha ala aretz hatoiva, that's noideh lecha Hashem Elokeinu. Hatoiva asher natan lach. So he says, what is hatoiva? What is the eretz hatova? This is from the Gemara. The eretz hatova is the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim. Why is Yerushalayim called hatova? Because it speaks about hahar hatov hazev halvanon. It speaks about the mountain that is good. And that mountain that is good, excuse me, is Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. The Chizkuni points out, what the Gemara also says, is that it's clear from us here that the bracha that we make is the bracha that we make after we've eaten. But says the Gemara, well, if you're going to make a bracha after you've eaten, where you're no longer hungry, where you're no longer needing food, where you're no longer like edgy because you're hungry and your blood sugar is a bit low and your blood pressure is a bit low and everything's a bit strange, and now you're sitting, everything's fantastic, and you're in great besimcha because you've eaten and you're going to give a bracha to Hashem now. Okay, how much more so when you're really needy? Do you need to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being the source for that food? And that we understand, and that's excellent. But says the Rabbeinu Bachaya says, I don't understand. He says, it seems a bit strange that how can you say that I need to give a bracha to Hashem? How can I give a bracha to Hashem? At the end of the day, and I said this a little bit earlier as well in my parasha, but it's such an important thing for us to understand. At the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world, He creates everything in the world, and He creates everything from which bracha stems. And if that's the case, how am I, who's like at the lowest level of bracha recipient, able to give a bracha to the one on high? So obviously I can't, which means that my bracha is not to bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's something else. So Rav Soloveitchik explains that the concept of Baruch comes from the word birkayim, which means your knees. And the idea is Baruch is me bending my knees. In other words, recognizing and being humble before the Ribbon Shel Olam, because I recognize where all bracha comes from. And because of that, says the Rabbeinu Bachaya, that what? That when a person makes a bracha on that which they enjoy, who may id al hashkocha, he testifies to the hashkocha of Hashem, to the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a direct role in our lives. Shehu yitaleh hamamtzi mazon lishvelim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ensures that those who are lower than him have food, kadei sheyichyu, in order that they will live. And Misbarachim u'misramim. Because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's need to give to us, it's in our zchut that there is produce. There's our zchut that there are fruits. There's our zchut that there's vegetables. There's our zchut that there's food around the world. That's why. And therefore, if a person who enjoys the food that we are given from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and does not make a bracha, says Rabbeinu Bechaya, gozel mimenu hashkocha. It's the most unbelievable idea. You know what he does? Hashem gives us stuff, so we take it. So the Gemara says, if you make a bracha, it's like you steal. How do you steal? You're not stealing anything, you've got it. It says, no, it's not that you're stealing that which you're given. What the theft is the concept of hashkocha, the concept of Hashem's direct involvement in our lives. When we make a bracha, we recognize that. But if we don't make a bracha, you know what we do? We say, we say that the reason why we got what we got is not because of Hashem, who was on the highest level of all spirituality and all creation, but rather there's because of mazel and because, we worked hard, we give over our bracha, that which we have, to other forces other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the biggest chilul Hashem that they can possibly be. And in that chilul Hashem, explained the Rabbeinu Bechaya, the Netziv speaks about it as well, is that when I make a bracha, I actually impact on the quality of the food, as a whole, in that kind of like genre of food. But if I don't make a bracha, then I'm actually stealing from the people in the world, because they don't get the same quality of that I do. And that's a fundamental problem. Then I just wanted to share with you a beautiful idea that comes from the Ben Yehoyada. There's two ideas from him that are so important for us to try and engage with when we eat. He says it's like something you wouldn't ever think of, because it's quite mind-blowing. And what he says is the following. He says, we know that we have got the Torah tells, you eat, satisfy, and then make a bracha. So Bnei Yisrael have taken it upon themselves, and that's the Gemara tells us, that even if we don't feel completely satisfied, we still make a bracha as long as you've eaten a kazayit. So we know that you have to have a kazayit, like on the Pesach Seder, you have to have a kazayit or matzah. You have to have a kazayit. That's a well-known thing, the size of an olive. But if that's the case, what we've done is we've created this unbelievable chumrah on when we do bench. So we've said that according to the Torah, it would seem to be that as long as you're satisfied, then you bench. We've said, well, only you have to eat a kazayit, and that's enough for the benching. But if that's the case, it would seem to be that kazayit is not really worthy of a bracha. And if it's not worthy of a bracha, so then what do you call that? You call it a bracha levatol. You're making a bracha for nothing. You haven't done the thing that you need to make the bracha on. It's like saying Borei Priya Eitz without having an apple in front of you, or having a fruit in front of you that you're going to eat. It's like making a bracha on the Shabbos candles, when you haven't done. We're so careful of those things. So how come when it comes to benching, we're prepared to do the smallest amount? And says the Ben Hoyada the following. He says, we need to understand that Am Yisrael are supposed to live in a world of spirituality. We think. And because we're supposed to live in a world of spirituality, the appropriate way of living would seem to be as ascetic as we can be. Because the less engagement we have with materialism, the more, inverted commas, holy we are. Because the space of materialism doesn't belong to Yaakov. The space of materialism belongs to Esav. As it says in the Torah, Hakol kol Yaakov ayadai mida Esav. The kol, which is more esoteric, which is more ethereal, which is tefillah, avodah, connection, spirituality, is Yaakov's v'hayadayim, in the hands. The physicality is Yadai Esav. And if that's the case, it would seem to be that if I'm going to eat to my physical filling, then it's not really a space. Excuse me, I just got to get some water. It's not really a space to get me to that space of spirituality that I need. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so if that space of being filled seems to be completely contradictory to what we as Bnei Israel would be, it would seem to be strange that it says, V'achalta v'savata. So comes the Ben Yehoyada and he says that the reality is that in this pasuk of V'achalta v'savata, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us reshut, he gives us permission to fill ourselves with food. And he says to us, you don't have to hold back to that point where you're only eating just enough to make sure that you survive physically in order to achieve spirituality. But rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know what? Even on the extras you can eat. And that's an amazing thing, because when we say Borei Nefashot, we say the bracha that we say after we eat normal things, right? Borei Nefashot Rabot V'chesronan. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Nefashot Rabot, all different people, or different types of Nefashot beings, V'chesronan, and that which they are lacking. And each one of us lack different things, and each one of us want different things. So some people like spicy food, some people like plain food, some people like this, some people like that. Why? Because that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us as our nature. And what's the purpose of that? Is that we understand that even in the stuff that we enjoy over and above the basics, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also part of that. However, come along Chazal, and Chazal says, you know what? Ideally, even though it would seem to be a bracha that you don't really need, which you call a bracha she'ena tzricha, a bracha that you don't really need to say after you've eaten such a small amount. The reality is that the word vasavata of satiation doesn't mean for everybody complete physical satiation, but for some people, it's just enough to have a little bit in order for them to achieve that certain amount. And so therefore, what we have is HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, you know what? You're a special people. V'achalta, eat. V'savata, and be satisfied with a little bit less than you really want, with a little bit less than complete satiation, because that's the way you achieve the power of Kedusha. And that, when you achieve that, is the way that we are able to undo the power of Esav. Because if we are in the world of Esav, and we're eating, and even if we're eating with brachas and all the things we need to do, and it's Mahadrim, and Chalav Yisrael, you name it, even then, in that world of Esav, what we need to try and do is somehow, right, even with the permission to be as to eat everything, it's just pull back a little bit, because in the pulling back a little bit, what we're able to do is go against Esav. And that's sorry, and that's really what we need to try and achieve in our lives. And then says the Ben Yehoyada, and this is fantastic. And I would like to go through this, because this Ben Yehoyada is so special and so important. So the Ben Yehoyada says to us that we understand that we've got a bracha that we have to say afterwards. We understand that there's an extrapolation from that if you're going to make the bracha be after, how much more so the bracha before. So he says here, I don't really understand this. He says, because the Gemara tells us that a person has to make a bracha before they eat, because if you don't make the bracha before you eat, it's a level of theft, as we spoke about before. He says, if it's a level of theft, there's so to speak, by making the bracha, what you've done is you've acquired the food. But if you've acquired the food, why do you have to make a bracha afterwards? You've already made the acquisition. You've already recognized where it comes from. He says the following, that we have to understand that that when it comes to lechem, when it comes to bread, there are three things we need to bear in mind. The first is the land. The second thing are the seeds, and the third is Adam. So you've got the land in which the seeds are planted, and you've got the human being that works on that land in order to bring out the bread. And we understand that it says that Hashem ha'aretz u'maloah. We understand that what in the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the land and the seeds, and how they will engage, right? So what happens is different people will take the seeds and they'll spread it out into different parts of the farm, and then depends how they do the farming. You daven very hard and you hope and you pray that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will send what he needs to, the brocha within the land, in order to make sure that the that everything is going to grow in the way you'd like it to do. And so therefore he says the Ben Yehoyada, there needs to be two aspects that belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and one aspect belongs to the human being in the growth of produce. And remember, you only bench on bread. So this is really what he's talking about. He says, therefore, Brocha Rishona koineh Adam chelek shekeneged hazera, Brocha Achrona koineh chelek shekeneged haaretz. Says the first brocha that you make before you eat, that is the aspect of acquisition of that part, which is the seed that belonged to Hashem, and the brocha achrona is the part that belongs to the land. So those are the two aspects of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, hold on a second, I don't really understand. Why do I have to say our same question? Why do I have to acquire something from HaKadosh Baruch Hu after I've eaten? It would seem to be that acquisition. So he says the following, that you always have to remember. The first part is the part that belongs to the seed. I understand I've got to ask Hashem for permission. But the second part is the part that belongs to the land. But the land always belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I can't like take the land. I can dig as deep as I want, but I can't actually take ownership and consume the land itself. The land is just the land. It's always going to be there. I can never really take it, and therefore we have to understand. So he says the following: there's a concept that we are the avadim, the slaves of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we're the slaves or servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the halachas that apply to servants will apply to us as well. And one of the halachas is a very important thing when it comes to acquisitions. And that is, Mashekana Eved Kana Rabo. Whatever the slave acquires, his master acquires. In other words, a person can't, if a person is a slave, they can never have their own personal ownership. Whatever they get belongs to their master. If that's the case, then says the Ben Yehoyada, most powerful thing, Ein la'adam zechut b'nechasav afilu rega echad. We never have total right in even what we think are our own personal physical possessions, even for one moment. Why? Because we're the servants, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the master, and everything belongs to him. He says, Chesed asa Kadosh Baruch Hu imanu. Hashem did an amazing chesed with us. Sheyichol kinyan shelanu b'nechaseinu. That he enabled us to acquire our things that we work so hard for. Whilst the food that we've made that brocha is sitting on the table in front of us, it's considered to be ours. But when we remove the table, i.e., we take away, then what happens? Then it goes back, so to speak, into the ownership of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because we can't acquire the whole thing ourselves. Everything ultimately goes back to our master. And that's why I need a new brocha. The brocha that I make of the benching, which is after the meal, is not a brocha of gratitude only, but rather it's a brocha of, in a way, recognition that everything that I consumed was mine, but anything that's left over, anything that I still have in my possession, actually is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why you say the brocha, ala aretz v'ala mazon, Hazanet Hakol, Bonei Yerushalayim, everything, Hatov Ha'meitiv, everything is coming and sourced in the Ribono Shel Olam himself. And those are a few ideas in benching, which I wanted to share with you. Because I think sometimes we don't realize how big benching is. I saw a beautiful thing, and it's not a benching thing, but there's this man named Mr. Applebaum, and at the last Siyum Hashas, he was interviewed. He's a very old man. He's in his late 90s, and he was interviewed, and he's got an amazing story of gratitude, and he went through the Holocaust, a whole lot of stuff that he was involved in. But they said to him, what's the secret to your, and he's strong. What's the secret of your longevity and your strength? So he said, because from the time, I think he was 24, and he's now 90 something, I have not said Asher Yatzar outside of a siddur. And that's unbelievable if you think about it. It's unbelievable. The brocha of Asher Yatzar that we know so well, that we say, it's the easiest thing in the world, right? He hasn't said it once out of a siddur. Why? Because of the kavona. Now, how much? Now, Asher Yatzar is a drabonon brocha that we make because that's Chazal said. But when I heard that, I was just thinking, gee, the one brocha that everybody agrees is a brocha from the Torah, is benching. Most of us, if you went through Bnei Akiva or you went through From Home, so then benching by heart. Even if you don't think you know it by heart, you know it by heart. And we sing it, by Ruach Chata, right? All these lekker things. But maybe the one thing that we need to take is understanding that this benching is really the giving back, so to speak, of everything we have into the ownership of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we sign cell phone contracts, not such a big thing, right? Then you look through all the things and you read the contract. You're going to buy a house or sell a house. You're going to do renovations. You're going to do something that's important. You read through the contracts importantly. This is a contract of giving back, so to speak, the Ribono Shel Olam ownership. Perhaps we should do it in a little bit more of a meaningful way. Those are just some things I wanted to share with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a beautiful week, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll continue next week, same time, same place.